Slavery is one of the most barbaric concepts the human race has ever conceived. Born out of a sick and twisted lust for absolute power to bend another man you perceive as lesser to your will. To even do this to one person is worthy of a special place in hell, an incestuous perversion of both hatred and vanity. But what happens when this is no longer a crime against a person, but a people? I will make no effort to examine why racism exists in this world, as it's a concept truly beyond my comprehension. Someone's melanin levels have absolutely no effect on who they are as a person, so why does this hatred persist? I don't really want to think about it. Racial slavery is horrifically the most common form in history and in gaming. So today I'm going to look at a few examples of slave races in gaming and determine why they were enslaved, as well as how well the game represents the indisputable abomination that it is. Now, it's important to note that in terms of video games, not all slave races are racially motivated. Because not every video game is trying to be extremely heavy all the time, developers will often craft different reasons for enslavement. One common reason is utility, having a people with an inherent gift not available to the majority of people, causing the former to be exploited. Such is the case in Final Fantasy XVI with the Bearers. It's ironic that Final Fantasy XVI tackles this theme, when during its pre-release, it was scolded for claiming to not feature people of colour, flaunting realism as an excuse. Square, I'm not sure if you know this, but fantasy is right there in the title. No one expects realism from you. But this statement was incredibly stupid because the game has an entire Saudi Arabia stand-in with Dhalmekia. That aside, bearers, while enslaved due to their utility as a people to use magic without assistance from the crystals, might as well be racially motivated. A bearer is branded a slave the moment their status as one is confirmed, a one-to-one comparison for racially motivated slavery. But here's where Final Fantasy XVI stumbles. According to its own logic, the bearers should be higher-class citizens instead of the subhumans they're represented as. A common motivation for racism is religion. Taking a 2,000-year-old text at its literal word-for-word translation without modern context can lead to some immensely moronic people. But during the medieval times that Final Fantasy XVI is set in, religion is a very esteemed concept. It's right there in the name of the Holy Sambreak Empire, that piousness is a well-respected value to have. The mother crystals in the game, which represent the only other source of magic in the world, other than the bearers, are said to be, quote, gifts from God. Their illustrious splendor represents a pure distilled holiness given form on the continent, looked upon with great reverence. And therein lies the problem. Why would those who have the same abilities as a gift from God be shunned? If we believe that the crystals are holy, why would those with similar abilities be seen as unclean? I can believe in a race being shunned if religion would have the population believe that they were tainted with the blood of a devil, as is represented in Attack on Titan, but it's illogical to me that the mother crystals would be seen as a force for good, but those with their innate talents are looked down upon. Now, I see why the upper class would want to enslave them. They're a resource. If using crystals causes ordinary people to turn akashic and bearers turn to stone when they use magic, then it makes sense from a capitalist perspective to turn the public's image of the bearers into subhumans so they can be exploited for their abilities. But can the citizens of Valsithia even be that dumb? It just seems like a stretch for them to just take the word of their governments with no evidence and treat it as gospel. If that happened in the real world, no one would believe a word of it, right? The only exception to the spite bearers are treated with are the dominants that are born into royal families, which is odd if not ironic. It's no coincidence that the reason those families initially rose to power was due to their dominance and their destructive power, which leads to the question of what came first, the rise of the dominants into the leading houses of the realm, or the stigma against bearers. It almost certainly has to be the former, or else all the dominant families would only rule through fear, as that's the only way the already spiteful public wouldn't revolt. But that doesn't appear to be the case. The respective citizens of each kingdom seem pleased with their current government, and it's only neighbouring nations and their dominance that strike fear into their hearts. So then that raises another question of whether it was the dominance of past generations that instituted the policy of bearers becoming slaves in an act of hypocrisy that goes unrivaled by even real-world governments. I suppose that also speaks to a class divide amongst bearers between the plain bearers and the dominants, and the power is the only thing that separates them, something the dominants of today are all too aware of. What I can praise about Final Fantasy XVI's treatment of bearers is that it realistically depicts that different governments would have different opinions on them and treat them differently. In Rosaria, bearers fare off the best, but still undeniably second-class citizens, but given actual jobs that don't require them to use their magic which will eventually kill them. This interpretation isn't exactly ideal, but raises a few more questions. If bearers aren't being forced to use their gifts, and are used for routine labour, then what's the point of them being slaves at all? They still have masters they have to obey, and when their masters die, they are reassigned to another one. It's an extremely weak justification for slavery. If your motivation behind your bias towards them isn't the utility of their gifts, then what's the point of having them be second class at all? I would understand the logic behind using them as tools, and I would applaud Rosaria if they treated the bearers with equal rights as the common folk, but this weird half-step is off-putting and creates an issue with the logistics of the duchy. The Holy Empire of Sambreak is much more cut and dry with their stance on bearers. They do not qualify as human, and even the mangiest hound on the streets of Oriflamme is to be treated with more courtesy than any bearer. Bearers born in the Empire are marked and relabeled as branded, so their heinous crime of being born is on full display for every citizen to see and jeer at. We throw around the term objectify in media a lot, and I want to let you know this is what it means to objectify someone. To peel away their humanity and make them a tool of no more worth than chopsticks or a washing machine is dehumanization at its finest. Their only purpose in the Empire is to literally be sucked dry of all their potential, leaving naught but a widowed husk and a dozen replacements in their wake. There's a rather disturbing scene at Martha's Rest, where a woman tells of how she left her infant at the military barracks when it was found to be a bearer, which again raises more horrifying questions. Are even babies drained of all the ether in their bodies, or are they raised to toddlerhood before their short lifetime of servitude in the name of the Empire begins? Interestingly, most of the bearers present in the Empire are drafted into being soldiers, rather than as something mundane like fuel for furnaces or levitating labour. Sambreak's solution to its branded problem is to simply put them out on the front lines of battle, where they will die quickly yet painfully, whilst still serving some worth in the glory of the Empire. What's even more sickening is some of the branded's loyalty to their Empire. During the prologue, Clive becomes the dirt amongst the dirt for defecting to save Jill, and his comrades meet this with ire. How can these people possibly feel patriotism for an emperor that has sought their torment from the moment they were brought into this world? Are they so conscripted to the belief their lives are tainted, they serve with glory and pride to their empire? It doesn't add up, or maybe I'm just incapable of understanding it. Next up is a race whose entire culture and evolution is based around the concept of their slavery, the Vortigaunts from Half-Life. The Vortigaunts are the only species in this video whose character design is meant to represent servitude to another. Their skin tone is a sickly green, which gives them a feeble look. Bright colours are normally used to indicate high status in a fictitious species, while muted tones represent a lower class of life form. This is a mirror of real life, where nations with dark-skinned natives usually live in poorer conditions than nations with fair-skinned denizens. The Vortigaunts are also hunchbacks, again, a body type used to indicate low status, as their heads are in a perpetual bow to whoever they're talking to. The Vortigaunts are enslaved by both the Nihilanth and the Combine, and I want to look at why they're such an easy target for every force of power in this universe, even if the Vortigaunts themselves aren't that powerful. The Nihilanth encounters the Vortigaunts after they flee to Zen to escape the conquest of the Combine, something the Nihilanth also did. Half-Life is a series that revolves around slavery, puppets holding puppets holding puppets. The Vortigaunts are enslaved by the Nihilanth. The Nihilanth's kind were enslaved by the Combine. The Combine seeks to enslave humanity. You are the free man, enslaved by the G-Man, and the G-Man is working for his employers. Half-Life is a vicious cycle of servitude and conquering, where it's not even clear who or what sits atop its universal hierarchy. At the very bottom rung of that ladder lie the Vortigaunts, who are a race of thinkers and scholars, not fighters. I know this because they're one of the introductory enemies in the first Half-Life. They're meant to be unimposing, with easily telegraphed attacks and a vulnerability state. They're so weak, there's no logical reason to enslave them for combat other than the fact that their numbers boost your ranks, even if they're cannon fodder. But I could have chosen literally any race present in both Half-Life games, because the Combine and even the G-Man are all puppets on the strings of a mysterious employer that we will see at some point in the next 10 years. That's my official prediction. Half-Life 3 will be released before 2033. The reason the Vortigaunts were created, outside of gameplay reasons to serve as an introductory enemy type in Half-Life 1, is simply to be the lowest lifeforms in the galaxy, to give humans someone to look down on, to show that someone is even more insignificant than them. The same response that triggers in you and me when we see a Vortigaunts and feel sorry for them is the same one the Combine and the Nihilanth have, only instead of sympathy towards them, they show dominance and seek to subjugate those weaker than them, who could never hope to fight back. Now I'd like to move on to Mass Effect. Again, slavery and subjugation are prominent themes throughout these games, and I'm going to look at the Collectors specifically. Throughout their immeasurable harvests of the galaxy, the dark gods known as the Reapers were only ever fascinated by one race. Of the eternity they've repeated their cycle, the Protheans. With the history of the galaxy wiped clean after every culling, it's impossible to know if the Protheans were the first species the Reapers enslaved. It's unknown and ultimately unclear why the Reapers thought to indoctrinate some of the Protheans. They have no inherent abilities that would make them powerful, and as godly as the Reapers are, they can't see the future. They wouldn't know they would need minions for their next cycle. Why in their infinite wisdom would they elect to leave their mission goal unfulfilled and spare some life in the galaxy, albeit to a fate worse than death? I mean, I know the real reason why BioWare did it. They needed a new main antagonist after the Geth for Mass Effect 2, and decided to retcon these guys into the game. But the twist of them being Prothean does nothing for the story, and in fact it ends up hurting the lore of the franchise. Perhaps having the Collectors be the remnants of the first of the Reaper's harvests would have been more narratively satisfying. Perhaps after the Catalyst turned the Leviathans into the Reapers, they preserved that synthetic life they'd been created to help sustain, and then the Collectors could have been a threat as ancient as the Reapers, as the last survivors of the galaxy's virgin lifeforms. It specifically doesn't make sense because the Collectors were employed during the purge of the Protheans, but why would converting them against their own kind be necessary to wipe them out? Shouldn't the prime directive of a machine be efficiency? The Reapers don't seem to be the type to randomly torment their harvests by twisting them against one another, but perhaps since the Protheans came closer to defeating the Reapers than any other lifeform before them, maybe the Reapers had to pull out all the stops, and conversion was just another edge they needed in the evenest conflict in their billion-year history of untampered genocide. As to the purpose they served after the culling, I suppose the Reapers decided they might as well be useful and assigned them to construct the next evolution in their kind. Although it's probably worth mentioning that the Collectors aren't slaves, but more drones that the Reapers control remotely. There's no Prothean in there anymore, or if there is, it's trapped in a sunken place. Ultimately, the Collectors are a retcon and needed to create an antagonist for Mass Effect 2, and I'm not a fan of any part of their society. You might even argue they don't qualify as slaves because they don't exist within their own bodies anymore. But I'm only reaching this conclusion as I write this, and I'm not deleting all that because I had an epiphany at the last moment. Slavery is an abhorrent sin against free will itself, and anyone who advocates for it in any capacity is the true subhuman among us. To subject an entire people to that abomination is beyond monstrous, whether it be for labor, their unique physical attributes, or a twisted religious belief built on lies. Just because you can, or for no reason at all, makes you irredeemable in my eyes. There are a lot of examples I didn't cover because I'm either unfamiliar with their series, or because I want to cut the video at a certain point. I'm still experimenting with this longer video length, and I'm sincerely hoping the extra effort put into this video will help it do better than my previous ones. In happier news, I've hit my 4,000 required watch hours to be monetized on YouTube, so I just need to hit 1,000 subs before all that watch time from my Resident Evil video expires next year. If this video does well, expect more of this type of content from me, and if you want to hear a section I cut for time but cover in another video, check out my old story review of Oddworld Abe's Odyssey.